Welcome to the Essential Skills for Humaning podcast, where we explore the fundamental abilities and insights that make us better humans. Here's your host, Christina Eanes.
Hi, everyone. Christina Eanes here. And for today's episode, we have Peter Schein joining us. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you. It's very good to be here.
Well, before we jump into the topic, humble inquiry, can you share a little bit about your background with our listeners?
Yeah, sure. Well, I grew up in a faculty family. My father was a teacher at the MIT Sloan School of Business for a long time. And then I went out and did my undergrad and my MBA and spent 30 years in Silicon Valley. And then after my mom passed away in 2008, my dad moved out here to Silicon Valley. And we started working together about 6 years ago, and we've written a bunch of books together and do consulting on, organization development, on culture, on what we call humble leadership. And so he passed away a couple of years ago, but this book was one of his breakthrough books that he wrote out here in California. And so this is a third edition of Humble Inquiry, and while his voice is very prominent in the book, this was one that I did solo, and I think he's not going to turn over in his grave. He will be comfortable with the changes that I made, and so here we go. Yeah, it's just launching today. So.
I love it. Well, so let's talk about first of all, defining what is humble inquiry.
Right. Well, we say sort of, throughout the book that it's an art and it's a practice. It's an attitude. So the art is sort of finding a way to always ask open-ended questions. Our brains are so wired around what we know and what we think and what opinions we've formed that it can be very hard to ask open-ended questions. And so that's the art of it, is recognizing that this isn't necessarily natural. We live in a data and information world, and we hold on tightly to what we know. And the art and the attitude says, I'm going to, I'm going to go full Jackson Pollock with my questions. I just don't know where this is going to go. I'm going to ask as many open, curious, and sort of alluring questions as I can in order to draw the other person out. And the idea is that I'm going to demonstrate curiosity. I'm going to be very mindful of the fact that I am intervening in their thinking. I'm intervening in their flow. So how can I ask questions that help them, so that collectively we both learn more? That's really essentially what the idea is. And the other thing that I want to say is that's sort of the art of inquiry. But why did we call it humble inquiry?
Mm-hmm.
And the reason we call it humble inquiry is that at some level in this, exceedingly complex world that we live in, we have to embrace the fact that we don't know, that there's a lot we don't know. We think we know a lot, but there's a lot we don't know. And there's more in the room around you, in a meeting, in a conference, at a table, or there's more information in that group than you possess individually. So recognize that you as a leader, or you as a consultant, or you as a medical profession, there's a lot more going on around you, that embracing the fact that you don't have all the answers makes it easier for you to ask those questions, sort of lead with curiosity. And so that in the end, all of these open-ended questions, you arrive at this conclusion that I have drawn people out enough that I am getting answers to questions that I didn't even know to ask before we started. So that's what the whole idea of humble inquiry, that's what this book is framed around. And, I should say it came from some work that my father did in around 2009, 2010, in a book that he called Helping. And that book came out of a process that he was going through with a lot of medical professionals and the illness of my mom. And he sort of started to see how the patterns evolve around, are they asking questions that will really help me? Or are they asking questions that are driven by their process, by their knowledge, by their belief? And somewhere in there, obviously, a medical professional needs to stick to what they know because they're the experts. But there are times when anybody in a helping profession benefits by asking a little bit more broad, contextual questions and really tries to draw the other person out to get to know what's really going on with them. So that's what humble inquiry is all about. Um, the the foreword to this book was written by a guy named Michael Bungay-Stanier, who is pretty well known. He's a very well known book called The Coaching Habit. But he's also known for a book around that's called The Advice Trap.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that really has motivated us in talking to people about humble inquiry is that it's so easy for us to sort of fall into the well, as Michael says, the advice trap, where somebody asks you, either explicitly asks you for advice or asks you the kind of question that you feel like you need to respond with some sort of directed advice. And the thing that we always argue about humble inquiry is that if you contrast it to advice, you really have to know a lot of what's going on in that person's head and that person's context and that person's situation before you should be weighing in with advice, right? When somebody asks you for advice, wow, that's a red flag that there's something going on, and it may not at all be the presenting question. Give me advice about XYZ. When if you're using humble inquiry to sort of probe and figure out what's going on, you may discover that it's ABC that's bothering this person far more than XYZ. So that's the backdrop.
I love it. Well, and I love how you mentioned explicitly and kind of implicitly. One of my favorite quotes was inquiry done right yields answers to questions you did not even know to ask. And I like how it's applied to medical professionals as well, because oftentimes we don't really realize, what that person is asking.
We did more work in consulting over the 5 years or so that my father and I were consulting together with healthcare organizations than any other, work sector. We consult all over the place, but the healthcare profession has picked up this book,
Mm.
whether doctors or improvement people, and I think it's because it's a simple concept, but in an expertise-driven profession like medicine, it's in a way it really fits a need in both ways because they are experts. They do need to to be exercising their profession based around their expertise. But at the same time, they're in a helping profession.
Mm-hmm.
So how do they balance that those expressions of knowledge and expertise with really figuring out what's going on for in the minds of patients and also in their teams. I mean,
Absolutely.
there's no more complicated um, sort of business context or professional working context than a complicated healthcare system. It's whether if it's a teaching hospital, it's incredibly complex.
Absolutely.
And so the part of the reason that I think the improvement people in the medical profession have picked this up is that they recognize they've got to be understanding so many different facets of motivations and intentions in different segments of their complicated business. And so teaching humble inquiry as an art and a practice across the organization, not just doctors, but also the improvement people, the efficiency people, the nursing segment for that's in its broadest sense. So I understand why this book has resonated in healthcare.
Absolutely. So you could even say humble inquiry could be a life or death skill. Like
Well, yeah,
literally,
I
yes.
mean, I'd hate to think there are too many of the latter examples,
Yeah. Yeah.
but yeah, I think there's often there's questions that weren't asked, and
Yeah.
or they weren't asked in the right way. One of the things that we go through in the book is we compare it with other kinds of inquiry, and one of the primary kinds of inquiry that we're very familiar with is diagnostic, where we're really asking questions um, that are based around what, right?
Hmm.
The series of what questions, because you're trying to tear down what happened. Oftentimes you have an idea what happened. And so you ask those what questions as a way of sort of confirming your bias. And of
Hmm.
course, and once I say confirming your bias, red flags go off like, "Oh, we
Hmm.
know that's, confirmation bias is a
Confirmation
bad thing."
bias. Yep.
So, um, so that's diagnostic. Then there's also confrontational inquiry, which is you have an idea what happened, you have an idea what or who is to blame, and so you ask kind of leading questions
Yeah.
that are driving you toward that hypothesis about what and why went wrong. Um, the problem with those, sort of similar to advice, is that there's more that you need to know. And so if you ask leading questions that are sort of hardening your confirmation bias, then you end up leaving information in the room or on the table that would have been pertinent, but you didn't ask open ended enough questions to get there, to draw out some of those issues. Um, the other kind of inquiry that we talk about, because it's complicated but it's helpful, is process inquiry, where you sort of say, wait, this isn't going the way I thought it was going to go. I'm asking questions that I thought were pertinent, but I'm getting blocked off, or I'm getting non-responsive answers. And so you ask the process question of, how's this going? How are we doing here? Are we getting to where we think we need to go? And it allows people to sort of step back and be a little bit mindful of the context in order to try to sort of regain footing on what the problem is that you're inquiring and responding about. So process questions can be very powerful and very helpful. But there are a lot of people who are just saying, come on, forget what the touchy feely stuff. I don't want to talk about how we're doing or what's going. I want to talk about the problem that we're here to talk about. And so then you need to go back to those. How can I ask questions in a way that's entirely open ended, and I'm expressing my curiosity. I'm expressing my intention to help. Um, and the reason that this is so important is that you may have that situation, you may have that context. But if this is a person that a colleague or somebody that that you're going to be working with on a continued basis, what you're really trying to do with humble inquiry is build what we call a substrate of openness and trust.
Mm.
Because the next time something comes up, you may become very artful with your humble inquiry, but you don't want to have to start from scratch with that person. You want to have built that that, by expressing openness, mutual openness, and building a level of trust that I'm going to say something to you and you're going to say something to me, and you're not going to use those things against me.
Yeah.
Then that substrate is what allows you to be more effective down the road, because the decisions that you make are based on a richer set of information, and more efficient down the road because you have built a rapport. You've built what we call a level 2 relationship with somebody that allows you, it streamlines your communication. You can more quickly get to those nuggets, those insights that are going to help you make decisions more efficiently. So it's an effectiveness and efficiency. But we tend to argue that it's most important to value that effectiveness, because people are very good at finding ways of being more efficient. We often forget that, sometimes we actually have to slow down and draw people out more in order to have a deeper effect of the inquiry and the responsiveness that we're sharing with each other.
I love that. Yeah, I love sharing. Sometimes we need to slow down in order to speed up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, so I can see with Humble Inquiry, because obviously people want to read the book, but maybe a couple of actionable strategies today. What would be maybe the first thing someone needs to do internally to get themselves in the right mindset? And then to add to that, what do they need to do the first thing maybe externally to be able to have that conversation?
Yeah, well, I think the internally is to, if you're, anytime you're going into a session, an inquiry session like this, and this could be, at a store, it could be, it could be in any level of meeting with one other person, or in a staff meeting, or in a huddle, um, in a medical context. I think it's worth going in with a moment of reflection to say, I'm very driven around the, the content of the problem, right? The agenda is built around the content of the problem. But I'm going to go in and say, before I tell, before I tell people what I know, what
Mm-hmm.
I think, where I think this is going, I'm going to say, wait, I'm going to keep that tell person inside me, and I'm going to let the ask person come out. And I'm going to, in a way that doesn't come across as affected, I'm going to ask open-ended questions. Because again, I know a lot. And so I'm going to ask questions that not only lead the witness, as it were, lead the conversation in a way where I think it should go. But also I'm going to ask questions in a way that show off how much I know.
Yeah.
And those are the pitfalls, right? You don't want to lead the questions in a way that you think they should go, because you don't know which way they should go. And you don't want to ask questions that are really just sort of humble telling. And there's no such thing as humble telling. So, now, and then externally, I think it's a matter of also letting that voice ask those. They don't have to be verbalized, but ask those process questions every once in a while. Allow yourself the space to say, "How's this going?" Again, am I so? We call it content seduction. Am I so seduced by the content of this discussion, or this debate, or this imminent decision, that I forget to sort of step back a little bit? Again, it doesn't have to be physical, but it has to be in your head. Step back and say, "How's this going? Are we getting to where we think we need to go?"
Nice.
one of the things that I would often say with this book, there's one thing about sort of reading the setup at the beginning, but my father and I have always believed in writing these books that you should start where you want to start, right? And one way you can start with this book is in the back. There are 12 mini case studies that sort of pose some of them are kind of work related situations. Some of them are very much personal related situations. And they kind of pose a situation. Somebody asks you for something or somebody says something. How do you respond? And you can go through these things and sort of give yourself a little gut check before you go into the sort of the theory in the book, because there's plenty of theory. Unfortunately, we try to keep it condensed, but there's some social psychology theory from last century that's still very current.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some sort of interpersonal communication theory, something called the Johari window, and there's something called the orgy cycle. These are theories that still apply, but if you plow right into that stuff, you might say, oh God, I just need help. Well, try these exercises at the end and see how we sort of would break down, because we ask the exercise and then we sort of give hypotheticals and break down what we think is humble inquiry, what we think is diagnostic inquiry, and so on. And that can be a good place to start, because it sort of gives you a level set on this topic.
Nice. Well, and I appreciate the explanation and the theory, right? Because it gives you the why. Why am I doing this? It gives you so much more depth of understanding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and these aren't work things, or these are not this is not really. Yes, it's a book that's appealed to professionals.
Yeah.
But a lot of this is just, I struggle to do this with my family, right? Well, so I've got a role as a father.
Mm.
I got 2 adult daughters and my wife,
Uh-huh.
and uh, we're not always that good at doing this with each other.
They're
And
essential
I would
skills for
probably be the
humaning.
first to say I can write a book about this, and I can expound about the art and the practice. But
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't mean I'm necessarily good at it, particularly in situations where there are roles that were established 30 years ago.
Yeah.
It's called a relationship because we have expectations of each other,
Yeah.
and those have been around for a long time. I have a 30-year-old daughter, so do the math. We've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that every conversation starts with 2 perfect humble inquirers. No.
Mm-mm.
We have to remind ourselves.
Yeah.
And
We are
then,
human.
it's a lot of it too is that being comfortable with the awkward silences, being comfortable in the white spaces, it's very hard for people. But my wife and I would share a story of somebody that we worked with a long time ago, who was one of the most effective and sort of brutal, in the sense of he's so disciplined.
Mm.
And I would say inquirer, but I would also sort of say interrogator, right? It was these are tough questions, and this was in a product development context. And this person's ability to not say anything was uncanny,
Oh.
in a way that really made you squirm.
Yeah.
So maybe that's an extreme, but embrace that I don't always have to be filling the dead space. I don't always have to be, avoiding the awkward. Sometimes those awkward silences are very important for you to sort of, to regroup. It's why we call it mindfulness.
Yeah.
It's about letting, you know, not letting the impulses take over us. Let the mind do some processing before you plow in
So we can respond
with.
instead of react.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Well, I know people are going to want to learn more. They're going to want to dive in and your other resources as well. So could you share a little bit about your other resources and or services, how people can access them, all that good
Yeah,
stuff?
sure. Yeah. So there's a website, ocli.org, and the OCLI stands for Organizational Culture and Leadership Institute. And this describes my father and I and the work that we've done and the books that we've written, which sort of fall broadly into three categories. Number of books about organizational culture. I guess if there's something that my father was, most well known for internationally, was one of the first people to write a textbook about organizational culture. And so we've written 5 editions of that textbook, and there's a book called The Corporate Culture Survival Guide, which is all about culture change leadership. So that came out a few years ago. So that's pretty current. And then our book Humble Leadership, which is a sort of it's humble inquiry, but it's sort of taken up a level to sort of the broader organizational level. And in a lot of these books, we talk about our theory about different kinds of relationships. We haven't really touched on it yet today. But I will say that I noticed you put ing at the end of a noun. Um, we created a term that we started as a typo,
Huh?
but we thought it was actually something good, which is and I'll tie it back to humble inquiry that um, it's we call it personizing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's when you are using humble inquiry to build what we call a level 2 relationship. And it's distinguished from a level 1 relationship, which is transactional.
Mm-hmm.
So you're recognizing that you need to build a personal relationship beyond that transactional relationship.
Yeah.
And we use the term personizing, kind of like humaning.
Uh-huh.
And we apologized from the minute we first said it because it's yet another sort of sounds like a weird contracted jargony term, but it's very different from personalizing. Personalizing is sort of like customizing.
Yeah.
Um, Personizing is when you both recognize that you need to develop a whole person to whole person relationship with each other. Because if you do that, if you build that substrate of openness and trust, then your communication will be more uh, complete and more comprehensive as you face the next opportunity and challenge together. So, yeah, moving from transactional to personal through the process of personizing, of which humble inquiry is a sort of integral part. So
Nice.
that's all somehow represented on that website. And you can contact me through that website, peter@ocli.org. If you have questions or, violent disagreements, I'm always interested.
Awesome. Okay, what is your final piece of advice for our listeners?
Well, I think it really comes down to what we were talking about humaning and personizing it. It really comes down to recognizing that, and I think the pandemic helped us do this, by the way, recognizing that we have our roles, we have our intentions, we have our OKRs, we have our, KPIs, whatever those metrics of performance are. We are still human beings, and while we think we need to maintain these roles, we think we need to sort of maintain some sort of professional distance. I would challenge people to push that limit. Ask yourself, do I really need to be this professionally distant from that person? Or can I use humble inquiry to sort of draw them out, get to know them a little bit better, so that we build that level of openness, which reinforced becomes a level of trust that's very useful down the road. It's it's allow yourself to be a whole human at work. It's not that easy, but it usually pays off.
Yeah. I love it. That's awesome advice. Oh, thank you so much for joining us today, Peter.
My pleasure. Thank you for a great conversation. Great questions.
Humble inquiry. No.
Yeah. Good. Yeah.
Transform your organization with Eanes Training. Our premier interpersonal skills training programs are tailored to enhance your organization's employees in communication, emotional intelligence, leadership, and more. We have a catalog of expert-led courses designed to meet the dynamic needs of today's workforce. With highly engaging in-person, hybrid, and remote sessions, we can help elevate your organization's performance and success. Learn more at eanestraining.com. Thank you for tuning in to the Essential Skills for Humaning podcast. We hope you've gained valuable insights to enhance your journey as a human being. Remember, practice makes progress. Keep honing those essential skills, and until next time, keep being the best version of yourself. For more resources, visit eanestraining.com.